Hi guys, it's Steve Gamble at Silex Assembly of God. Today I want to talk to you about a little book called Philemon. Philemon is one of 4 prison epistles that was written by Paul. The prison epistles consist of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and the letter that we're going to talk about tonight on Philemon, written while imprisoned in Rome. We know that Paul wrote this because he starts it off, he's kind of got his signature M.O. in the intro where he says, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ. Every letter Paul wrote began with the word Paul, followed by either a prisoner or an apostle, as in Colossians, or as in Romans, a servant to Jesus Christ. Philemon tells us the story of a runaway slave named Onesimus, who found his way to the site of Paul's imprisonment. And Paul was under kind of a house arrest, but he was allowed visitors during this time. So it was really cool that he could actually continue his ministry while in prison. Now you talk about a divine appointment, that Onesimus, a runaway slave, would find Paul. And what was so cool about this is Paul actually led Onesimus to Christ. And Paul alludes to this divine appointment in verse 15 when he says, "For perhaps he," being Onesimus, "therefore departed for a season that you," and this is talking about Philemon, "should receive him forever." So he's actually talking about that divine appointment. And while visiting with Paul, like I said, Paul actually led him to Christ. And now Paul is writing a letter to his good buddy Philemon to accept Onesimus back. And we're going to talk about it right here in verse 16. He's not going to just accept him back as a slave, but in verse 16 he says, "Not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved." This is so cool. So, like I said, he's not asking Philemon to accept him back as a slave, but rather he's asking him to accept him back as a brother in Christ. He's also asking Philemon to accept him back as he would have received Paul himself. This is in verse 17. And he's also asking, he's asking Philemon to accept Onesimus back as if nothing had ever happened. Imagine that. This is kind of scandalous on Paul's behalf. Just accepting like nothing ever happened. You see, Onesimus had first off ran away from Philemon, which is a serious offense in and of itself. Some think that Onesimus may have even stolen some stuff, some things from Philemon as well. So Philemon was definitely guilty of these some charges, and he was definitely deserved punishment under the law. First off, I want us to explain. I think it's important that we understand the differences between the slaves of the Roman time and the slaves that we think about as the American slaves, because there is a vast difference. The slaves that we think about were under so much bondage, whereas the slaves in Rome they were allowed to earn a wage. They was allowed to marry. They even they held titles within the church. They could buy out their freedom. And for the most part, in Rome, the law was for slaves to be released at the age of 30. So it's kind of interesting there. It's totally different from the slaves that we think about here in America. So this is where Paul teaches mercy. I love this. Rather than punish Onesimus for all of this offense that he had done to Philemon, Paul asked Philemon to accept him as a brother in Christ. And Paul, in verse 21, you see, he has absolute confidence that Philemon's going to do exactly that he's going to release Onesimus, or accept him back. So here's what he says. He says, "Having confidence in you, in your obedience, I wrote unto you that you will do more than I say." So what What Paul's alluding to here is his emancipation, his freedom, that Philemon would grant Onesimus his freedom. You see, Paul gives us an image of Christ here as well in verse 18. I love this about Paul and how he kind of gives us this image of Christ. Because what he says here, he says, if he has wronged you or owes you aught, put that on my account. You know, we, like Onesimus, we've sinned and fallen short of God's glory. We do it every day. And we certainly deserve punishment. But Jesus, by going to the cross, he said whatever they owe, whatever punishment they deserve, I'll pay for it and I'll take it. Isn't that just a beautiful thought to think about? This is exactly what Paul was showing through this letter. This letter to Philemon reminds us of when the law melted into love and mercy triumphed. Thank you.